I did my first crimp with this tool that I got from Aircraft Spruce for crimping 1/32 up to 3/32 cable crimps. Now, I would not recommend this tool after using it. I used it once and I hate it. Here's the issue. This tool is not strong enough to crimp these 3/32 sleeves. Yes, it can do it, but the jaws do not stay straight when you crimp it. This is the first one I did, and I don't know if you can see it in the picture here, but they're all sideways because what happens is you start crimping it, and no matter what you do with that cable to try and keep it straight and keep that sleeve straight, the jaws end up going like this or like this, and it's impossible to keep it straight just by trying to, keep the tool straight and this straight. It just starts crimping and it goes off. So I would not recommend this tool. Now, I did a second crimp, which is this one here, that honestly turned out perfect. But what I had to do is I had to actually put vice grips across the end of this to hold the jaws together and crimp so that it kept the alignment of the jaws up and down so that I could actually get a straight crimp. But anyway, yeah, this one actually it couldn't look any nicer. So, I mean, I've got a solution for it, but it's not a good solution for, how the tool is supposed to work. Now, I've got another dilemma too. You can see I put 3 crimps in this sleeve. Now, this is 3/32 cable. So everything I've been able to find on the internet says that I should only use 2 crimps on this. Now, this is the instructions for the tool. The instructions for the tool, the biggest cable you can use is 3/32. Now, they don't tell you what these pictures are of, but I do know that the tool on the smaller sizes below 3/32 don't have that narrow crimp area. They have a full width crimp area, which means all the other sizes just get a single crimp, and it's the 3/32 one that actually has a small, and you can see it here, has a very, very narrow crimp at the end there that needs multiple crimps. But the question is how many? And I haven't been able to figure out what's really proper. Mine looks exactly like this. Now that I've crimped it, I've put 3 in there, and I'm assuming that this is a picture of the 3/32 cable. The gauge fits in there. Everything looks good. I'm using the, Aircraft Nico Press, basically, crimps or sleeves. And so the question now becomes, are my crimps narrower than maybe other tools? I don't know, because they don't tell me what this diameter is of that press that it's doing, and I don't know what the diameter is of other tools. So I really don't know if I'm supposed to use 3 crimps or 2. I think it looks better with 3 because you can get 3 in there, but everything on the internet says I should just be doing 2. So I'm not really sure what to do now because, of course, I want it to be done correctly. I know you can actually weaken a cable if you put more crimps in the sleeve than are required, and you can actually weaken the fit. So I want to do it correct, but I can't figure out what correct is right now. I'm doing it correct according to their manual for this tool, but I'm not doing it correct according to any other thing I found on the internet for this size cable. So I'm really not sure what to do at this point. I've tried to look on the internet. I'm trying to figure it out right now, and I think I'm going to do a little bit more research to see. But I believe I could get away with 2 crimps, and this would be airworthy. I mean, from an aircraft certification requirement. Now this is experimental, so it doesn't matter. But I'm not sure what the proper crimp method is here. So again, more frustration today. This was terrible. I mean, this first one I did, I had to cut off, and I couldn't believe how bad it was. But I am tempted to continue to use 3 crimps on these because, again, this does seem to be, this does seem to make a complete nice crimp. So I don't know. I don't really know. I know I'm worrying about something that in the end probably won't matter. I'm just trying to make sure that I do it right and know the right way to do it. So I'm gonna do a little more research, and I'll be back in a little bit. So I did go back and look at the instructions one more time that came in the box with the tool. Now, I was just on my computer a little while ago looking at their instructions on the internet, and there was one thing that I did not see on the internet that I do see here. And I remember reading the same thing, so I'm not sure if I missed it or what. But it's, and this is very, very confusing. It says, select the proper size cavity marked on the tool jaws while holding the sleeve in place. Swage 1/3 to 1/2 of the sleeve or one compression. Now that doesn't say for what size, and since the width of the tool is full width for the smaller sizes, it makes me think that what they're talking about is the smaller sizes where maybe you have to crimp it all the way across in different steps, maybe 1/3 of the way or halfway, but you end up crimping the whole sleeve. You're not putting these notches in it like we are with the 3/32. Now, right after that, though, it says 3/32 requires and it's spelled wrong. It's supposed to be, I'm assuming, requires 3 compressions. It says compressions. So, and then it says move over and swage the remainder, second compression. 2 compressions are required. So I think since the full sleeve would fit in these 3 smaller sizes, you're supposed to crimp half of it to 1/3 of it in one crimp, move over and crimp the rest, but it crimps it all flat. The 3/32 one, however, actually crimps the ridge in there, and for the 3/32 with the ridge, you're supposed to crimp it 3 times. I'm going to assume that's correct. Again, it makes this look nice, although you do have to be careful that you get it right in the middle and that you have enough space on either end, and you have to be careful that you space those 3 correctly, but that does seem to make a proper crimp. It looks correct. So that's what I'm going to do. So I've got the first one crimped in here for this side. What I'm going to do is cut this cable off, and I'm going to crimp the other side, and then I'm going to try and measure and make sure I get these 2 cables exactly the same length. I believe it's supposed to be 1400 millimeters from the center of this tube to the center hole here. Now, I don't think that measurement is all that specific. It's just more important that these cables are exactly the same length so that this tube isn't sitting crooked. It's like having a steering wheel not be centered when you're going straight down the road. So we're just going to try and make sure we get as close to that as possible. I think that's 55 and 1/16 of an inch is basically what that 1400 millimeters is. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this cable off, assume this one's good. I'm going to make another one right here that looks identical, and then we'll go ahead and crimp these ends on next. The nice thing about this end is I can take this this off and just crimp this on there and then slip it on there later, so I don't have to maneuver around trying to crimp stuff on the end of this. But I think I've got the tool figured out. I think I can crimp it well here, and we'll just keep going and try the next one. All right, I was able to finish the cables that go to the rudder from this tube assembly. They came up pretty close to being exactly the same length. It's really hard to, when you're crimping, connectors on here, to get them absolutely perfect, but I got them as close as I could. I actually set this in the vise on my mill, just sitting in here, but I was able to then attach a tape measure from here and run it out to the end of these cables to try and get them as close to the same length as possible. And what I ended up doing is, once I had them connected here, I cut the cables to the exact same length, ran them out, cut them to the exact same length, and then I used the tail that was still remaining sticking out to measure where this needed to be crimped, because if I had 4 inches from the crimp out of extra cable, then I knew I had the exact same amount on both sides, and that's what it ended up being. I think I cut them at 60 inches long, and I ended up with 4 inches of length from here to the end of the cable that I did end up cutting off afterwards, but that's how I was able to get them as close as I could instead of trying to physically measure them, to the end and try and crimp. I did one correctly and then measured from here how much tail was left, and then did the second one with the same amount of tail sticking out, and that seemed to work really well. So yeah, I've got a cable I need to put on here and another one that goes on here, and these are the ones that actually connect to the rudder pedals. And so what I'm going to do is cut those extra long and go ahead and swage the ends of those cables on here, and then we can actually install this tube. And let's see, we can also run the cables through the cable guides, and then we can start reinstalling the pedals. Now, I haven't finished the pedals. I mean, I still have some grinding I need to do. It's a little bit of shaping I need to do. I need to paint those, but we can get everything in here and test fit, which I think we might as well go ahead and do now that we're working on the cables anyway. And then we'll pull it all apart and actually finish the rudder pedals themselves and clean them up and paint them and things like that. My nose gear, I had my nose gear off when I was working on the frame one and starting on the rudder pedals up here, just to get it out of my way, because I had to remove this upper support here, the center support that goes from frame 2 to frame 1. And it worked out really well, because now I've got my airplane here sitting in a downward dog position, and now I can walk back here and actually get up underneath here to get to that rudder horn to start installing and hooking up the cables, which are going to go down through there. So anyway, it works really good. If you have the nose gear off, you can actually get to the back of the airplane without crawling on your hands and knees. All right, so let me go ahead and start making these other cables, and I'll just crimp these on there the same way I did these, and then we'll start installing this. I finished crimping the cables that connect from this junction bar, I'm not even sure what you call it, up through the rudder pedals to the frame 1. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and install this in the airplane. I'll feed these cables through the cable guides that we already have on the sides of the fuselage, and then we'll run these cables back through to the rear of the fuselage, to the tail, and actually see if I can hook up the straps that we made here, wherever they are, these, onto the rudder arm, or rudder horn, and just see if we can fit everything in place and see if everything's making sense on fit properly. Hopefully none of these cables are too short. I cut these cables that go to the front about 90 inches, which is supposed to be almost 10 inches longer than they need to be. So we will, they'll hopefully be fine. So let's go ahead and install this in the airplane. I'll get the rudder pedal tray installed too, and we can feed these through the rudder pedals. And the only other thing I wanted to mention here is it's always a good idea to tape the ends of your wires or cable that isn't crimped, just to make sure that it doesn't unravel too much. I just put a small amount of tape on here. It still should fit through all the cable guides. So let's go ahead and get this installed. Well, I have that rudder control tube laying back there, and I've routed the cables all the way down into the rudder horn in the back, and I did put bolts through the shackles that we made earlier, so that is now connected to the rudder, temporarily. And you can see I ran the cables down through the cable guides that we installed in the fuselage a few days ago, and so the cables are laying out here. I was able to grab the cables and pull them tight and actually actuate the rudder in the back. It works great. So I think what I'm going to do now is just temporarily put the rudder pedal tray in, and then go ahead and route the cables through that. Again, just to test. And I think we have to, I'll have to look. I think there has to be a hole put in frame 2 here, or I'm sorry, this subframe. I think it's 1B or something like that. And then there has to be a hole that we put in the front where we attach a clamp to, to actually put the tension on the cable. So I'm going to start working on some of that stuff too. We'll see if we can get that stuff finished pretty quick, and see if we can actually have the rudder pedals moving the cables and moving the rudder shortly. Here's what the bottom of the rudder looks like with the shackles attached to the cables. And again, I just have a bolt running through there just to hold it in for now. I'm going to take those shackles off and paint them, but these cables will probably stay here. I won't probably take them out. I'll disconnect them from the rudder horn there, but otherwise they're routed and should be okay. I need to double check when we get tension on it to make sure that nothing's rubbing here with the cables, but it shouldn't, I hope. So let me go back up here, and I'll start putting in the rudder pedal tray, and we'll go from there. You can hear fireworks in the background. People are lighting stuff off next door. It's still the 4th of July, by the way. I put the rudder pedal tray back in. I don't have the holes here cut into frame 1 or this frame 1B. We'll probably do that next, just so I can actually have the cables running completely out. We can get some tension on them. Right now, I don't really have any tension on the cable. I did notice one little issue here, though, that I'm going to have to deal with. As you can see, the cable as it comes out of the rudder pedal tube at the top is not really pointing directly at the first support here, cable support on the frame 3. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm obviously going to have to bend this so that it's at least pointing that direction. We wouldn't want this cable to be quite like this because it's going to want to rub on this side of the of that cable support, in addition to the fact that up here it's likely going to rub on the end of this tube. Now we do have to notch out this tube. We're supposed to kind of make a curved part to the top of here where it's actually cut open on the top so that the cable can kind of come up and flex back and forth and kind of have an area at the top here where it can come above the tube and kind of float. But again, it's important that that cable, or at least that rudder, be pointed in the right direction. I've got that situation on both sides. You can see this one too, where the cable is not coming out straight. So I'll fix that with the rudder pedals here, and I'll do that next in addition to getting the hole drilled in frame 1 and frame 1B so that we can actually run the cables out. I do have to make the clamps that we're supposed to put on the outside of the airplane to, you know, tension the cables and clamp them to. I also do need to make the stops that we're supposed to make that get clamped to the cable here that provides the actual right and left stop as the rudder pedals are actuated. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with the springs here. I just stuck these in. I just had these in the shop and I just wanted to have something to hold it up. Just to play around with, I was just using those springs, but that's not anything permanent. So I'm going to go work on a few more things. Let's see if we can straighten out those tubes and get the cables actually connected to the outside of frame 1. One of the things I've been trying to figure out is if I wanted to do the rudder pedal tray adjustments that, or at least the feature that's designed to adjust the rudder pedal tray in the manual. The manual actually has some wires that come across here with a pin or a lever that goes down into this hole that's supposed to catch into holes that are drilled into the track. And this piece of metal comes up here and bends up here, and you're supposed to be able to, with your heel, push down on it to disengage the rudder pedal tray and move it back and forth. Now, I've decided that I don't want to do that. There's a couple different reasons. I was concerned about, you know, your feet getting stuck in here on those wires. The other thing is that this tray, if it's adjusted for me, will never need to be adjusted again. So the only person who's going to need to adjust this tray is somebody who's flying this airplane that's not me. And chances are, if you're flying this airplane and you're not me, and you need to adjust the pedals, it's going to be very difficult for you to probably figure out how to use these wires to pop this loose to be able to slide it back and forth. And I'm not even sure how it slides back and forth. I could see maybe if you pushed on the pedals, maybe you could get it to slide forward, but I'm not sure how you'd get it to slide backwards. So the whole situation with adjusting this rudder pedal tray, I've decided to make it a little bit more manual because it's just not something that I can see that's going to even need to really be done. The other thing is because I have these access panels that I'm putting in the front of the skin for the fuselage, I'll be able to get my hand into this tray to be able to manually adjust it. So sometimes searching on the internet for way too long does actually yield some results. So what I've come up with is, and I actually got this idea from Maz. So he's one of the other guys that's building a CriCri, and he had found some of these quick release pins that he stuck into his tray to hold it into place. I wasn't able to find a quick release pins that fit at least the grip length or the thickness of this, and although I could have probably made some kind of receptor for that to plug into that would fit on top of here, those pins would still come out, they'd be loose, and I just thought maybe I could find a better solution to that. So what I did is I found these. So this is a, let me actually get the description of what it actually is. So this is called a mini indexing plunger, and the part number is here. It's the 822.8-5-6-C, and it's made by JC Winco. And what these do is that this is when it's in the closed position, and all you do is you pull up on this knob here and you turn it maybe a 1/12 of a rotation. It's not very far, and it will go into a detent and hold up on its position and hold the pin up, and then again you just turn it that much, a little bit more, and pops back down, and the pin comes out. Now what I found was really neat about these is that the spacing of the bolt holes on this is for a number 8 bolt, which is what we have here for these screws, number 8 screw. It's a countersunk screw, but the spacing between the holes is 30 millimeters, which is almost identical to what we have here. In fact, I think this is like 30.5 or something. It's so close that honestly, when I set it up here, I can't tell the difference. So what I'm thinking of doing is actually installing this and screwing it in right here on the aft side of the front guide connections, and we can just put 2 countersunk screws into here and be able to hold these index plungers in place. And I can put 1 on each side, and then when this rudder pedal tray ever needs to be adjusted, I can open up the access panel up here, access these, and just pull them up, twist them, pull them up, twist them, and I can slide the tray back and forth with my hands to adjust these pedals if they need to be adjusted for anybody else, and to do my initial adjustments. So I'm thinking that's an easy, quick solution to be able to solve this problem, to not have these wires sticking out in here that you could catch your feet on. I'm trying to figure out, even with shoes on, how you would even be able to feel that they're there. So again, I'm going to eliminate those, and I'm going to use these instead. These are not light though, so let me comment on that. So this plunger, or I'm sorry, the knob on the top is plastic, but everything else is cast steel. And then the pin itself that comes out is stainless steel. The pin that comes out is 5 millimeters in diameter, which is a good size for what we're using here. But I'm just going to mount one of them there. We'll mount one of them here. And I think that'll work really, really well. And the fact that the bolt holes are close enough that I can make them work, that's even better. Now the only thing is this has a, you can see the little, it has a little lip that comes out here on the bottom around the plunger that comes out. What I'm going to do is that lip is about, let me see, it's 2.5 millimeters, so it's like 0.1 inches. And so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to get some 63 thousandths material, and I'm just going to make a piece that's the shape of the base of this. We'll drill a hole in the middle and drill the holes for the screws, and I'll just kind of use that as a washer or shim plate to go underneath this so that I can screw this in here, and that won't be sticking down through the bottom of the rudder pedal tray. So I'm going to start working on this. I'm going to get these holes drilled in here and see if I can make that little shim that needs to go on the bottom, but I just wanted to comment that's what I'm going to do to make my rudder pedals adjustable, and for me, I think it'll work out better. So I cut out these shims on my CNC machine, and these are going to be installed underneath these plunger pins just to move them up a little bit so that it covers the distance that this little lip is that's coming out the bottom of these. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and position these right over the top of the screw holes in the bottom of the tray here. I'm going to mark where the exact center of these are and drill a hole in it. I'm going to drill it just about the same size as this 5 millimeter pin, maybe slightly larger, and then I'm going to use that hole on either side and reinstall the tray, and then use that hole to drill the holes out into the pedal rails in the positions in between the rivets in the rudder pedal rails. So that's what I'm going to work on next, just to try and get these so I can actually install these and screw these in and have the pins actually work. Now, I had holes marked in the pedal rails, but it was for this hole in the back here, not for holes that are going to be up here. So I kind of have to relocate the holes that I already drilled into the pedal rails, but I only did 16th inch holes in the ones that these were supposed to use, and some of them I will reuse for this up here, but they don't go up far enough and they go too far down because of the position they are on the tray as far as where the new holes need to be. So I'm going to work on this next. I'm going to go ahead and get these holes drilled in here and start drilling out the pedal rails. Well, if anybody's wondering if I'm motivated to get this airplane done, I actually just got back from Oshkosh 2023 about an hour and a half ago, and I'm already out in the shop trying to get this airplane done. I am trying to get this airplane done for 2024. I'm trying to do whatever I can to get this done for next year so I can take it there to the show. So we're going to keep moving here as quick as we can to get as much of this done. What I did do right now is I put some blue tape on the pedal rails. I went ahead and measured in between the rivets that are on the pedal rails to find the center, and I marked, I think it's 4 or 5 spots in between the rivets that make the tray align with the holes that were made in here previously, at least on the back side, so that we can get the holes on the top here that need to be drilled in, since we're moving those the retention point up to the top of the tray in here instead of the bottom. So I went ahead and drilled the first one. I'm just drilling 1/8 inch holes. I put a rivet in here on this side just to hold it so I could come over here and drill the hole on the other side. And I'm just kind of working my way back down the pedal rail until I get all the 1/8 inch holes installed or drilled. And once those are done, I think I'll final drill this out to the size of the plunger pin and see if I can get those installed and make sure that that hole fits in here, and then I'll come back and put the tray back on, and I'll go ahead and drill out all the holes to the final size. That way I make sure they match, and hopefully they're all lined up really good so that there's no binding when we put those pins in. So I'm going to keep drilling these out, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a little bit further. I finished drilling all the holes in the pedal rail here, and I went ahead and installed these tray retainers that I have, and I screwed everything together. It's all tight. I just want to show you how this works. So it's in the holes right now, so it doesn't move at all. But all I have to do is pick up on this and just rotate it that much, and it lifts the pin out and locks it. I can do the other one over here, turn it a little bit, and now they're unlocked. And then what happens then is the tray will slide back and forth fairly easily. And then what you can do, because they're spring loaded, I can actually rotate it back so that it's now trying to lock itself again. I can do that with both of them. And then what I can do is just slide the tray until I hit the holes. And you can see it just locks into place. So I really like this. I think this is a great solution for this. And what's nice is that I don't have pins that are removed that then could float around or have to be tied somewhere in here that would have to make sure they go back in. These are always in, and as long as they're released, you can slide the tray and they'll lock right into place. So I think it's perfect. That's what I'm going to go with. So what I'm going to do next is I've got to do some finishing on the actual rudder pedals themselves. I need to get those painted, because the next thing I really want to do is just get those bolted in here permanently and installed so that I can finish running the cables through them. So I've got some finishing on the metal that I need to do. I got a couple welds I got to finish on there, and also get them painted. So that's what I'm going to work on next is finishing the actual steel pedals. We'll get those installed, and then we'll start routing the cables and finishing the cable routing. There's a couple of aluminum clamps I need to make, or there's a clamp that's supposed to go back here on the back side of frame 4 on each side that is a stop for the rudder, and it's an aluminum clamp that you just put over the cable. I need to make those because I think I need to slide those onto the cable before I run the cable up through the pedals. So I'm going to probably make those, and I've got the cable stops that need to be installed through frame 1, because the cables go through the pedal, through the pedals here, and then go through frame 1, and then there's a clamp that actually secures that cable that goes all the way from front to back solidly so it doesn't move. And then I also need to work on, the steering. I got to work on the steering cables, which we'll do that after all the pedals are installed and we get these cables installed that actually go to the pedals. We'll then work on the actual steering assembly. So all right, I'm gonna go work on the pedals, and I'll come back and show you what they look like when they're ready to install. What I'm working on now is the cable clamps that are used for the rudder stops, and also the cable clamps that hold the cables onto the front of frame 1. And I was having a little bit of a hard time figuring out how I was going to do this, because this is kind of what the clamp looks like, is this. You're supposed to slide the cable through it. We're supposed to drill a couple of bolt holes through here and then actually clamp the cable in that hole. I had some difficulty though trying to figure out how I was going to cut this slot. I don't even have a bandsaw, so I don't have anything but a woodworking chop saw and a CNC machine and a lathe and a mill. I don't have any kind of saws that would cut this kind of slot into aluminum. And so what I decided to do is, I had this from my Dremel tool. This is a it's a thin cut fiber cutting disc, and what I decided to do was just put this into my drill here, or my lathe or whatever, mount it in here, and then what I'm doing with a block here is I'm using my mill to just run back and forth across here and cut a slot into this piece. That's what I ended up doing with this, and then I took the block over to my chop saw and just cut this piece off. Now I ended up cutting this too thin, so I've got to make another one, but this was kind of a test anyway to see if this was even going to work, and it actually worked really well. So I'm going to try and make a few more of these. Again, I'm just cutting the slot across here into this material. Then just cutting it off on a chop saw, I put it back in here, and then I went ahead and drilled that hole all the way through the center of the slot, and I think it's going to work. I mean, these don't have to be perfect. They just have to clamp the cable. So I'm going to start working on these, see how far I can get, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a bit further. Here's what the cable clamps look like complete. The last step, I just rounded the bottom of this over on the disc sander and just cleaned them up a little bit with some sandpaper and some Scotch-Brite. But yeah, they turned out good. This hole that I drilled through here for the cable, I initially drilled a 3/32 hole in there because that's what the cable size is. But I could not get the cable to fit through that hole, especially on the ends when it can be a little bit frayed. And not necessarily frayed, just kind of not as tight as the actual center of the cable is. It just starts to come apart just a little bit. So what I did is I did oversize these holes. I drilled it to a 7/64. That allows it to slide on the end of the cable, and then it fits kind of loose on the cable, but I think once I get these bolts tightened and these nuts tightened, I think it'll tighten up against the cable, which is really what we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and get the two that are going to be used for the stops installed just behind frame 4. So I'm going to slide the cable, or I got to pull some of the cable out. I'm going to slide these onto the cable, and there's some rubber washers that I think are supposed to go in front of here to kind of act as a little bit of a cushion when this hits the backside of frame 4. There's supposed to be some washers stacked up here. I couldn't really tell in the plans because I couldn't read. I can't actually understand what the actual name is they're calling these washers, but I'm assuming they're rubber. At least that's what I'm going to use. I'm assuming I want a little bit of cushion there. So I'm going to go to a hardware store and pick up some washers before I put this back together. I'm also going to allodyne these real quick so they're finished so that I can put them on the cable and they won't come off. Hopefully again. So I'm going to go get some washers and get these installed, and then I'll show you what it looks like once they're in the airplane. I went ahead and made one of the clamps that we're going to use to attach the steering cable to the main rudder cable. It's made very similar to these. It's the same size, 20 millimeters by 15 millimeters tall and 6 millimeters thick. This was actually, like I said, it's almost the same to make. It's a little bit different process in that obviously we don't have to cut a slot through it. And what I ended up doing here is taking a drill bit and just drilling 3 holes right next to each other, as close to each other as I could, and then using another smaller drill bit in combination with the drill bit I used to drill this out, and just kind of cleaned out the hole. You really need to get those drill bits that you drill through as close, or those holes as close as you can to each other, so you have very little material in between. In most cases, I had a very thin film in between, or I had actually a gap that ended up showing up in between, so I could, you know, clean out the material a little bit easier. But I also just used a small metal file to you know, do the final clean out on here. It turned out pretty good. Just to comment on in both cases, when I cut the slot in the middle of this one, or I drilled these holes, I started out with a much wider or thicker piece of material, and you know, drilled these holes in the middle to create this opening, or cut this slot down the center, and then I went back after the fact and just worked the sides of this to thin it down to the thickness it's supposed to be, which is 6 millimeters. This is, you know, starting out at close to 9 millimeters, I think, even 10 millimeters, because it's very difficult to get that slot exactly in the middle, and it's difficult to drill these holes exactly in the middle. So it's easier if you just start out with something a little bit thicker, get your center part completed, and then go ahead and just mill down the sides, you know, in case you have to mill down one side further than the other to keep that opening that you've created, or that slot that you've created, in the center. So and again, all you do is you tap, you know, drill holes in the end of this and tap these holes for screws, and then what we're going to do is kind of make a clamp where we put the two cables inside of here with a little I don't know if you call it a shim or whatever, that gets clamped down, so when you screw these screws down, it actually pushes down on a piece of metal that's sticking in here. And I'll show you what that looks like when I get it finished. But I'm just going to go ahead and mill out the other one here and see if I can get another one of these made. We only need 2 of these, one on each side, whereas we needed 4 of these for the retainers for the front of the cable, and also the stops. So let me go and cut the other one of these out, and I'll show you what it looks like once we get the little piece that goes inside of here, and actually show you how this is going to clamp together. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. I finished making the 2 cable clamps that are for the steering cable. I also created these little shims that are supposed to go inside of these, and you know, this is just so that when you tighten down the screws, it tightens this down on top of the cable and squeezes the cable underneath this, between this and the bottom of these cable clamps. So I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to aludyne those. But yeah, so these turned out good. I'm a little bit concerned that my screws are actually a little bit too short, even with this in here as a shim underneath here. So I'm going to have to verify that when I actually go to clamp the cables down. But anyway, this basically goes in here something like this. I have the screws all the way down right now, but I've got some longer screws that I can switch out. I could have made these shim pieces in here a little bit thicker, you know, since, you know, if I was concerned about the height of the screws, but a little too late for that. I don't want to remake these anyway, so I'll just change the screws out if I need to. But yeah, that's basically how these are going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on the rudder pedals. I need to get those finished up and actually installed on the rudder pedal tray. I got a few more things done here on the rudder system. So I got the actual rudder pedals. I did the few welds, or had John do the few welds that need to be finished on these. And I went ahead and painted them. I greased this tube that goes in the center here and installed that. I greased the bearings on the end here and installed the permanent hardware that I'm going to use for the rudder pedals. And then back here, I did get the rudder pedal stops fit onto the cables into the position they're supposed to be, just behind frame 4. I haven't bolted them in, obviously, because we're not going to tighten those until we actually get the rudder cables adjusted. And then you can see I also put little washers on here, little rubber washers, which I got from McMaster Carr. I think these are 1/8 inch inner diameter and 1/4 inch outer diameter. They seem to fit pretty well. I think they'll work good for the stops here against the backside of frame 4. You will see, though, that I did put a washer on here, a steel washer. I was a little bit worried about these little rubber washers getting stuck or sucked into where the cable goes through here on frame 4 if it hit there a little bit too hard. So I think the steel washer will help prevent that from happening. This is actually a number 3 washer. That seems to fit the cable really well, that 3/32 cable size. So I think what I'm going to do now is I haven't finished permanently attaching the cables to the back there on the bottom of the rudder horn, where we made those steel shackles. So I think what I'm going to do is go in the back of the airplane right now and go ahead and permanently bolt the ends of these cables to the rudder. I'll have to grease those bearings also, and then we'll start coming back up here. We'll start feeding the cable through these S-curves on the rudder pedals. And the other thing I did too, as you can see up there, I did drill the hole into frame 1. Now I do have to drill the holes into frame 1B. There's supposed to be a fairly large opening that just allows the cable to go from the rudder pedals through that frame and then to the stop that is going to be attached on the front side of frame 1. So these are all the things I'm going to keep working on here to try and get the rudder pedals finished. I'm not exactly sure how these are all going to get adjusted, and I've got to get the the rubber shock mounts from here connected and figure out how I'm going to do that. But we'll come back and work on that after I get these other little things done and get the cables fed through, so we can start tightening things up and seeing how these rudder pedals actually are adjusted and positioned. Okay, I've got, before I tip the airplane back down, I did want to show that I do have the shackles here installed for the rudder pedal cables to the bell crank at the bottom of the rudder. I got those bearings greased, got those bolts put in there, so this is basically ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and tip the airplane deck back down and see if I can start connecting the cables to the front through frame 1 and see if I can get a little bit of tension on these and see how they work. So I ran into my first problem trying to install these clamps that go on the front of frame 1. I drilled these holes out just a little bit bigger than the size of the cable, which I'm glad I did, because I would have never gotten the cable through the little hole. No matter what you do on the end here, even with a fresh cut, it's still a little bit, it unravels a little bit, and it's a little bit bigger diameter than the actual center of the cable is down here. So the only issue I had is once I did get these on there and I clamped them and tightened the bolts, this didn't really get tight on the cable until it bottomed out this cut in the middle, so I didn't have any gap in there at all. Now it did tighten up, so I couldn't pull it off, so it definitely was tight, but I don't like not having a small thin gap in between here, so that I know that when I'm tightening it is actually tight and not just bottoming out on the two sides. There are two halves of the aluminum being crimped together. So what I'm going to attempt to do is use my really thin cutting tool and just see if I can widen this gap just a little bit more with the tool. Now luckily I think because I clamped it together already and bottomed them out, I think it bent it a little bit, so this gap's even a little bit thinner than it was. So I think if I just run my tool through it, I can get this just a little bit wider slot here so that we have a little bit more distance that we can use to clamp with. So that's what I'm going to try. I got to clean these up a little bit and see if I can get that to work, and then see if I can get these clamps on here. I'm trying to get these cables tightened up so that I at least know where everything's going to go and can flip the pedals up and try and do some adjustments here, and then we'll start seeing if we can get some straps on here to actually get these so that they're spring loaded. But yeah, let me see if I can fix these clamps up here first, because I got to get these cables pulled tight. Well, I was able to widen the slots here on these clamps that I made. Of course, I realized after I fixed the two on the front that I had to take the cables all the way out back to here and actually fix the clamps for the stops also, because obviously they would be loose too. But I widened those slots just a little bit more, and I think they're fine now. I've been able to clamp the front ones here pretty decently, so I don't think there's any issue, especially since I have plenty of gap left. Now this is these rudder cables are actually quite interesting, because I had a hard time figuring out how this geometry even works. What keeps tension on the cables, how this thing works with the pedals, with the S connection in here, and it's kind of interesting now that I have it hooked up. So obviously I had to pull it tight enough so that it raised that tube there, that cross tube there, which connects the front section of cables here to the back section of cables, and it also changes the ratio at which the rudder is rotating. But I've got the cables all connected here. Now I did have to put bungee cords to hold these pedals forward, because the way this works is with these S curves in here, if I didn't have these on here, these pedals will just fall forward and at the same time, both together, and the cables will just loosen up. So the cable tension is completely controlled by how much tension you have between here and the pedal tray with the straps that you put in here. So that controls the total tension, and then when you push on this one, it pulls this one, obviously, and when you push on this one, it pulls that one. But you're not really tensioning the cable as much as you're tensioning the pedals with the straps here, because the only thing it does by tightening up the pedals here, more and more and more, is it just moves the pedals forward together, and then if I loosen up, it moves it backwards together. So trying to get this 15-degree angle that we're supposed to have forward should be at the point where it's fully tensioned by the straps or the bungee cords that we're going to end up putting between the pedal tray. So we're going to have to do some adjustments there. But anyway, I thought this was interesting. I've got this connected now, so it's got tension on all the cables. They're not really very tight, considering I just have these bungee cords on. It's fine, but the geometry of everything here looks great, which is good. I do worry about these ferrules here wearing out at some point, because there is quite an angle that you end up having to go from frame 3 over to the pedals, but you can see I've got the angle right here. Angle looks good over here. So anyway, this is really interesting. So I think what I'm going to have to do right away, now that I have this basically set up, is I need to double check my angle here on the pedals, and I might need to tighten them up loosen them up a little bit more, I guess. Actually tighten it. Tightening them moves them back, loosening them lets them come forward. So I actually need to tighten them up a little bit more to get the pedals at the 15-degree angle forward from the pedal tray here, which I need to do. And then once I get to that point, I can start working on the bungee straps that I'm going to set up here between the pedals and the pedal tray. And I do have something I want to show you once I get to that point of what I decided to use for those bungee cords, because again, trying to figure out what to use for this airplane can sometimes be a little bit tricky, especially when they just say use rubber bands and use bungee cords. So the basic geometry is set up here. Everything's connected. It's connected all the way back to the rudder. So we're getting somewhere here. I just need to figure out how I'm going to do these bungee cords to actually hold these into place. Okay, I'm getting pretty close here. So I've got the rudder actually right now exactly in the center. I've got the pedals now positioned directly in the center, so they're good. I did check the angle of the pedals forward. They're supposed to be 15 degrees forward from, the plane down here generated by the tray. Right now I'm about 10 degrees, so what I have to do is move both pedals forward about 5 degrees. Now what I'll end up doing is, since I have everything lined up with the rudder and the pedals, that tells me that I've got the right length on both of these and the right length on my stops up there, or not my stops, but my clamps up there. So what I can do is I can take the bungee cords off now, and I think what I'll do is I'll carefully adjust each one of those clamps on the front side of frame 1 about 1/4 of an inch. So I'll just pull them out 1/4 inch and screw them back on, both of them, and that should keep this in alignment with the rudder being centered and just make these pedals float forward a little bit more, which is what I'm hoping to do. So I'm going to go ahead and make that adjustment and see if I can get these in their exact position so I can actually clamp everything down and go ahead and set the stops here, and we'll see how the travel works. So I'm starting to try and figure out a way of attaching the shock cord that's supposed to go from the pedal here down to here. Obviously I have this temporary shock cord here just to hold the pedals, but we need to replace these with a shock cord that wraps around this mount here in the front of the pedal tray, and then also wrap around the pedal itself, and then we have to tension that a little bit. Now the plans show that you have to put some kind of piece of metal wrapped around here to prevent the shock cord from eventually getting cut by this thinner aluminum, and they show the same thing up here on this steel bracket. Now what I tried to figure out is how to make something that would wrap around here but yet not fall off, because the shock cords on the pushed in pedal will actually become loose where it's pulling the opposite pedal tight, through the cable system. So here's what I'm going to attempt to do. So this is a piece of tubing. I believe it's the 3/8 tubing. Yeah, it's the same 3/8 tubing that I used here for these control rods for the ailerons. And what I did is I cut a slot in it initially so that I could slip it over the top here and rotate it just within the hole. So it would push all the way down to about the center of the hole, and I could rotate it. And then I put 2 little cuts in the ends on the opposite side. Now my goal was to slip this over there, rotate it around, pull it up a little bit, and then crimp it, or crimp it around the top, or compress this tube and make the radius smaller so that it will stay on. and not rotate, because again it's going to catch the radius of the cutout here in these little cuts in the bottom of the tube. And it seems like this is going to work as long as I can actually crimp it so that it doesn't fall off. I think this will be a good solution for the bottom. I'm not really sure what to do with the tops. I do have a little bit of an issue because these steel brackets are not parallel with the brackets down here. These probably should have been welded in at a little bit more of an angle. So what's going to happen here is the shock cord is going to want to sit down in this lower radius here, which is much harder to try and put some kind of protection on. If I could, this will be easy to put protection on, because again it's pulling pulling perpendicular to the tube here and not off to one side, whereas this is going to be pulling on the bottom. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do at the top yet. I'm trying to get the bottom figured out here first. So let me make a couple of these, see if I can get these pinched onto these metal support, or sorry, these aluminum supports here for these bungee cords, and kind of go from there. So this actually worked pretty well in theory. It ended up looser than I wanted it. So what I really should have done is I should have cut a much bigger slot in here, so that when I crimped it over, that I reduced the radius even further so that it wasn't loose on here and it was a little tighter. But I think the concept of this is going to work perfectly. I probably need to figure out how to get this one off though, and see if I can make this one a little bit smaller, because like I said, it's pretty loose on here right now. But let me try and see if I can make the one for the other side. I'll come back and fix this one. The other option would have been is maybe just, I don't know, I guess I could have just folded a piece of aluminum over. I kind of like using the round tube though. A tube of smaller diameter, I wouldn't have been able to flip around, but at the same time, with now a big enough slot in there, I probably could have just pushed it in through this side and up. So I kind of defeated the purpose of needing to try and get this so that it just fit in there perfectly from the top and rotate it around, which is what I was trying to do. So let me play around with a little bit more, see if I can come up with a little bit better solution for this, because again, I don't want this just rattling around. When the pedals push, this will get loose. Now the shock cords will be underneath here, so maybe it's not a big deal, but yeah, I'm gonna see if I can tighten that up a little bit. So I was able to get the two lower bungee cord mounts done. I think this will work fine. They're just a little bit loose on here, but they're nice and rounded, so the bungee cord shouldn't wear too badly on those. So now I'm going to try and do something for the upper one here. And I think what I'm going to do is a similar thing with a tube like that, but I think what I'm going to leave is a tail on it that I can curve around the inside of this and possibly round it a little bit, so that I can provide a little bit of support on that lower radius there. But that's what I'm going to try next, to do something similar like this, that I can again just pinch over it and then have it curved around the bottom. So let me see what I can figure out for that. I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. So I tried to create something that would bend around the radius here on this hole, and it just didn't work. So I'm kind of doing the same thing I did on the bottom here, where I just took a tube like this, and on my mill I just cut this slot into it, cut a small slot in the other side so that it would fit down further on here, and basically this just slides in like this, and then I can crimp it on there. It's not going to really protect down in the very bottom of this hole, but I'm not sure there's going to be a whole lot of tension on that part of it. I'm going to have to test it out and see, but yeah, I'm just going to do this, clamp this one on here, and we'll try to put the bungee cords on here next and see how they fit. Okay, I was able to start putting in some of the bungee cords. Now let me show you what I'm actually using. So this is just an industrial bungee cord. This is actually 1/4 inch, not 10 millimeter. I went a little bit smaller, which I'm kind of glad I did, because I would have had a hard time fitting it through these holes. And so this is really just like standard bungee cord. And I purchased this stuff from this organizedob.com. And the reason I bought this stuff from them is they had these connectors for bungee cords. And this is tapered. It's got a little arrow on one side, so it only slips onto one side. But you basically put this clamping securing mechanism over the top of two cords like this, and then you slide it inside of this sleeve. So you basically press this sleeve on top, and what you do is this is tapered on one end too, so I noticed that you have to be careful. It's actually thicker on one end than the other. So this goes, say, this direction. There's an arrow on here that goes this direction. Once you clamp this around the bungee cords, you can start sliding this up, and then you take a pair of pliers between the plastic part, once it's folded over like so, and the base here, and you can slowly slide them together on each side, and it basically just pinches the bungee cords in between here. And I think this is going to be very secure, provided this connector doesn't break. So I was able to get one bungee cord on each side, and the rudder pedals actually work, and they're fairly stiff. I was planning on putting 2 cords on each side with separate connectors, again, just in case one of these connectors broke. You know, I would only lose 1 cable and not 2 bungee cords and lose all the support on one side. I did run into a problem though. I tried to make these cords exactly the same length so that I could measure the amount sticking outside of the connector here, and then close the connector and secure the bungee cord with a little bit of tension on it. The problem is this hole here in the upper part of the bungee cord hole connected to the tube here, the distance between the tube here and this hole, they're really close together, but I didn't realize on the other side here is a big gap where this was welded on between the hole and here, and there's at least a 1/4 of an inch difference or more. So even though I have the cables at the same length, my pedals are not symmetrical right now. So right now I've got a little bit of left rudder in when these need to be, the tension has to be the same on these, otherwise the rudder pedals are always going to be off. There's no way to really adjust that. There's no rudder trim. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably just going to cut this connector off. I've got some extra ones, and then I'll shorten this bungee cord and reattach this side, and then I'm going to look at adding a second cord on each side, although I'm a little bit concerned that this is going to be, there's going to be a lot of rudder pedal pressure. So I think once I get these leveled out, I'll go ahead and test this again. But you can see I'll move the whole airplane if I try and move this. But if I do push them with one hand, it does work, and it doesn't seem too stiff the way it is with my hands. But you know, your feet might be much different. I'm assuming your feet are less sensitive to pressure than your hands are. So. But yeah, this is working out well. This is what I'm going to do, and this seems to be a fairly good solution instead of trying to use like the safety wire or something to try and strap these together. So let me go ahead and play around with this a little bit more. I'm going to get this right pedal fixed, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a little bit further here. I was able to adjust this one over here. I cut this collar off, and then just pulled a little bit more of the cord through here, and then put a new collar on there, and it seems to be perfect now as far as the pedals are centered here and the rudder centered in the back. Now, one of the things I'm thinking of doing is I'm still a little bit concerned about these cords and where they hit the metal parts here. What I think I might actually do is maybe take some of this cord or something like that and cut some short pieces that I can run through the hole here, and actually maybe put some safety wire around it and tie it real tight in the bottom of this hole, so that these cords that go through here will rest on top of it and closer to the center of the hole, and not be just riding on this edge. And then I can just have that, you know, that piece that isn't really moving just sit there and absorb some of the impact of these cords, you know, up against that that edge there. Obviously, I don't care if the piece that I put in here is just a scrap, starts to wear. It doesn't really matter. And I can probably do that same thing down here in the corners here. I'll just push these cords over a little bit and they'll stack next to it. I think that might be the best solution, to just get something in there so these cords, as they're stretched in and out, aren't wearing on there constantly. So, well, that's how my rudder pedal alignment ended up with the bungees I installed. Doesn't get any better than that. I can't tell it's off at all, so it's perfect. I did install the panels underneath here, the inspection panels. Again, I did make this one removable that we discussed a long time ago when I did the rear fuselage, so I just put screws in it just like the front one, so I could get up here into the lower rudder bell crank. And of course that one gets into the elevator bell crank area. And then now that I've got the elevator and the rudder system installed, all the final bolts are installed, triple checked and greased. I shouldn't have to get into here again, and I wanted to get these panels on before I tip the airplane back down. Since I have the nose gear off, I'm able to put it in a downward dog position, and this sits about four feet off the floor at least. So it's very easy to get underneath the tail now, so I can actually put it back down on the floor. And you know, I'm actually getting to the point where I'm ready to put the horizontal stabilizer on. So anyway, just wanted to show you those panels while I had the back of the airplane up.